so I'm just here trying to just summarize some of the things we've done, right? Before this class, right? Let's see. It's really talked about EC2 here, and then we talked about Fargate here, right? Oopsie. Fargate. Okay, cool. Um, so I'm just trying to look at some of the things we've discussed before now, right? So infrastructure as service, we've always known that is EC2, right? You take care of, yeah, like you get a compute from AWS and you do your thing. You basically decide which AMI you want to host. You decide what are the custom run times you want to run in there. You just basically decide what you want to do with the machine, right? It's like an infrastructure that is given to you. But we also saw that it depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes you just want to run code, right? You basically just want to execute a code, maybe based on an event, or even if it's manual execution, it's you that will decide. But for the most part, if you just wanted to run code, Lambda could do that for us, right? And we said that's like the serverless pattern. So if you were going the serverless route, and then we said containers actually give birth to a lot of opportunities, right, in cloud computing. And containers are powered by Docker, the Docker runtime. And then if you look at AWS, the way it's organized, you see that EKS is a pattern, right? So anytime you see EKS, just know Docker is involved. There's no way you can run anything inside of EKS if it's not Docker, if it's not containerized, right? So, and we said EKS is basically, you're already doing Kubernetes and you want to do it in AWS, EKS is the tool, right? But something also that Docker gave birth to inside of AWS is also ECS, right? Because you can go the AWS native route. So instead of you doing pure EKS, you can basically use ECS, right? So it's like an option from AWS for you to host your containerized application, but it's native to AWS. So whatever deployment you have in ECS is not going to work in any other environment, right? And we said there are different options. You can even use EC2 as an option, and then you can also use serverless, right? Every time you see Fargate, it's serverless, right? Whether it's in the context of EKS or in the context of ECS. And we said that Fargate or serverless is just basically you are really not in control of the underlying machine. So it's more or less like on the very other side of the spectrum for infrastructure as service. The fact that you're not having to deal with the infrastructure yourself, right? So EC2 Fargate. And we said batch is also another service, right? For HPC and for long running workload, because that's one of the challenge that Lambda gives you, right? You can only execute it for 15 minutes. And then if you really wanted to do more and you wanted something that is long running, just execute like a containerized application and let it run for long. Or you were doing high performance computing or batch computing, we said there's an option called AWS batch, right? But again, that is not going to work if your application is not containerized. So they are all connected to containers. So the thing is that if you not think about it, right, and if you see for EC2, right, so let me extend this diagram, and there's a reason why I'm trying to create this picture in your head so that you understand how these things fit, right? But we realized that if you were doing EC2, for example, right, we saw how we could use ASG, right? So there was ASG here. Sometimes there was also more or less like you had sometimes you maybe probably wanted to manage your own ALB, right? So ALB, right? More or less like you had like an application that had ALB, ASG all together, and then that was you did manage scale at that level. But the beauty of it is that all these options are basically there, and you can choose any route you want to go. And I've seen all these patterns. So there are people who pretty much they have like an image, and they still want to retain that image, right? They will just get a container they'll just get an EC2 machine from AWS, and then host and then run that their more or less like their AMI, so their own custom image, right? And then pretty much put anything behind it, right? But I've seen patterns too where you just want to run a certain code, and then you'll be like, you don't really need the underlying machine. You just want to go serverless, right? And then if you were dealing with containers, you could go any of the patterns that supports containerization, right? There's a need for you to have this picture in your mind because it's actually what shapes how you build things in the cloud, especially knowing the things that support container. So for example, EC2, if you were to like run a containerized application on EC2, you had to do more or less like a lot of installations, right? The Docker runtime, everything, you have to set that up. But many of these things that you see here, they're already built to more or less like run your containerized workload. So they're already there by design. Okay. So that takes us back to where we stopped the last time. So we were looking at this slide. This was exactly the last slide we were looking at before we stopped. And we were comparing Lambda to batch, right? And we said Lambda, basically we explained it that there's that 15 minutes, batch, you don't have that limit. But the thing is that batch, like I always mention, what brings batch to life is really containerized, right? So containerized application. Cool. So when you now think about it, right, one thing I enjoy a lot about AWS is the fact that you just have this plethora of options, right? You can choose anyhow you want to go about it, but there's always these options available to you. So if you see how the diagram that I showed before, especially if you were here on Sunday where we're building on the call, you saw that we did create an EC2 machine. We did set up like an auto scaling group. We did create like a load balancer. We did all those connections ourselves, right? So we were doing all that ourselves. But the thing is that in AWS, there is also room for you to basically get a platform from AWS, right? So we talked about infrastructure as a service, but you can also get platform as a service. What it means is that you basically just bring in your code. That's basically what it means. If you think about it, it's also different. It's a bit different from how how we saw it in Lambda, right? So here you're just deploying the application itself. You are not really managing the infrastructure, right? And if you think about platform as a service in AWS, there's really one service that does it well, and that's Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, and it supports a lot of programming languages. So it supports Python, Node.js, Ruby, right? And some of the programming language that I mentioned there. So you basically deploy on the EC2 machines, right? But load balancing, auto scaling, monitoring, all that can be given to you just alongside what you are doing, right? And it's also very much developer friendly. The fact that you are basically just going to be pushing your code and then Beanstalk itself handles every other thing for you, right? And you pay as you are aware. Whenever you see things like this, where AWS is handling the part for you and you're handling the part for yourself, you basically pay for most times the resource you use it, right? As time goes on. So this is really important because some people just don't want to, like, they don't want to, if you notice, we were on the call, we're trying to deal with security groups, load balancing and all that. Some people don't want to do that. They basically just want to execute their Python application or their Node.js application, right? And that's where Elastic Beanstalk comes in. So if you see Elastic Beanstalk still uses a lot of the things that we already know. Like it uses your load balancing, it uses your EC2 instance. So if you wanted to go that route and just own the management yourself, you can. But there is a tool in AWS called Elastic Beanstalk that can simplify all that for you. Okay. And there are different models you can use. So single instance, basically, if you wanted to test something out, like a dev test environment, you can do that. You can also do the load balancing, right? Production with ALB plus auto scaling, all that we did that manually. But think about it that if all that manual stuff was just taken away from you and all you just needed to do was just bring in your code, right? Bring in your application and then just execute it on the Elastic Beanstalk environment, right? You can also have like a worker environment where there's just background jobs that are processing stuff from SQS. Okay, we've not seen SQS in details, but as time goes on, you see that SQS is just basically a simple queue service, right? Something that helps us with queuing. Queuing is a problem in cloud in the sense that sometimes you want to be able to handle requests, but not immediately, and then you can put them in the queue and handle them more or less, like respond to them later, right? In an asynchronous manner, right? And then there is so many deployment options that is out there, like all at once, rolling, immutable, blue-green deployment. But at this level, pretty much you will not be stressed to know that, like you won't be stretched that much to understand a lot of like the nitty-gritty of the deployment options, right? But you're supposed to know what Elastic Beanstalk is as a platform on its own. Okay. So with that said, let's go back to our account. So our account is here. I'm just now going to look for Elastic Beanstalk. So there's really nothing to say about the service. There is really nothing much to say, just other than you see it, right? You see it in action. So if you see it here, it says Amazon. Let me zoom, like I usually zoom my screen a bit. So it says Amazon Elastic Beanstalk end-to-end web application management. So yeah, it's an easy-to-use service for deploying and scaling web application. So you can scale all these web applications, right? Without really bothering yourself about the underlying infrastructure. And you see that, and the reason why you appreciate this is because you've done the class for ALB, right? You've done the class for auto scaling. You've done the class for EC2 instances. So you know that whatever is done here, you have an idea. You have it at the back of your mind exactly what's doing. But now you're choosing not to be the one to manage all those infrastructure and let AWS do it for you. And then you will just focus on your application, right? Pricing, there is no additional charge for the Beanstalk itself. So it's something you need to know as you grow in your journey. You basically don't pay for Elastic Beanstalk, right? You only pay for whatever is provisioned for you and whatever you're using, okay? So let's create a simple Elastic Beanstalk environment. So the good thing about it is that sometimes it tells you, is it like a web server environment or like a worker environment? So most times a worker environment is basically, you're just running workers, right? So I'm just going to call this call it test. In my own case, I want to try with a test web app. So test web application. I don't need to give it any tag, so it's optional. Test, yeah, this is where you give it like an environment name. So there's something that is unique about Elastic Beanstalk is the fact that there's a concept of environment, right? You can have dev environment, QA environment, prod environment, right? For the domain, I can choose a domain, but if I choose not to use anything here, it's going to be auto-generated for me. Okay, I'm using the managed platform here. I'm just going to say, in my own case, I think I do have like a, let me see, I have like, let's see, to see which example. So I'm just going to use, for my platform, I'm just going to use, let's do Node.js, okay? So let's do Node.js. It says it's running on this Linux environment. I'm just going to use their sample code. This is where you choose if you want, like if it's a single instance, Spot instance. Spot, I think I did mention Spot at some point, but Spot is really the fact that the workload can be interrupted. So if you have something that is not critical, like it can be stopped, it can be restarted again, and that's a good use for Spot instances because you're going to save a lot of money, right? And there is also like the high availability option. And by now you know what high availability means, right? When you host your application across multiple AZs, right? In this case, I'm just going to do single instance and then I'll do next. So I'll do next. Let me see. This is where it asks me for service role. You can create a new one if you don't have. There is also an instance profile role. So the instance profile role is really the role itself that the EC2 instances will use, right? So that allow your EC2 instance to perform required operations. And if you notice most of the calls, I've told you that usually as time goes on, you see that inter-service communications, you need like a role, right? So most times when you're provisioning like a Lambda, an EC2 machine, there's usually like a role that is needed for you to access other AWS services, right? Keep here, yeah, it's optional, right? And you know why you need a keep here. If you need to SSH into the machine, you need a keep here. But in this case, maybe no, okay? I'll do next. For VPC, I'm basically using my default VPC. Remember, we've also not started talking about VPCs just yet, right? We basically most times use the default VPC that is in the account. Public IP address I'm going to enable, right? Remember, all the times we did load balancing with EC2, we had to enable public IP, right? Just the reason is because we wanted to test via the internet. And then you can also specify which subnet you want to use, right? So you can enable the database if you wanted as part of your platform. In this case, I'm not testing with the database. I'm just going to do nest. So this is where I pretty much, if I wanted to go like configure that thing, so more or less like specify like the kind of volume that I wanted, right? The volume type, the GB, the IOPS, and and the throughput. If I wanted all those details, like the monitoring, if I wanted to specify something around monitoring, auto scaling, right? If I wanted to specify anything auto scaling, I can do it here. And the instance type, if I wanted to, I can actually specify it here, right? So in this case, let me just do T3 micro. What about T2? Let me see. It's there. Can't even find T2 micro, but it's fine. I'll just do nest, and here you can also choose like if you wanted Spot instances, right? So yeah, you can do all of that. So just go previous. Let me see. Just be sure that okay, cool. We could actually skip and go to the review directly, but I actually wanted to show you some of the options that are there. Okay, so yeah, you can leave the default, leave all the default, leave all the default also. But I actually wanted to see if I'll see like a micro instance. Maybe the 3 micro will be fine for me. And then I will just do next. Which architecture? I'm actually doing X, yeah, T. So which micro instance is available here? T3 micro, okay. Yeah, ARM was what I was choosing, but I now decided to choose AMD. So health monitoring. I'm just going to take all the defaults. Email, you can put an email address where you want. As time goes on, you see many of the configuration options that we have here, but honestly, I'm not going to bother with these ones, okay? Just going to do next, and I'm in the review page, okay? If you notice, I didn't have to select a lot of options. I'm just going to create. So we'll just give it time. So one thing you'll notice is that if I go to CloudFormation, which is pretty much, I'm not sure if it's, but I think at this point we've not talked about CloudFormation, okay? It's also a service that you see at some point in AWS. But one thing you'll notice is that a stack is already being created for me, right? So I know a lot of people talk on this call, people talk about Terraform, and I also tell them that in AWS, Terraform is something that can allow you with infrastructure as code, but AWS has their own native tool, which is CloudFormation, and there's so much you can do with it, okay? So I think because you're trying to create an Elastic Beanstalk environment, there is already a stack that is being created for you. And usually the way CloudFormation works is that it's a stack, but there's a lot that is going on inside. So if I, for example, go into this stack, I can see what's exactly happening. So if I look at events, I'll see it's creating a bunch of resources, right? And like I mentioned in some of our classes, I told you that with time, right, you'll get to see that many of the things that we're actually doing, we can actually put them as infrastructure as code, whether it's with CloudFormation or it's with Terraform or it's with any other tool that is out there. But again, some of the things that are here probably will make sense to you, right? Because you've seen them before. So the concept of a security group, right? So for example, if I click on this security group and I try to open it, let me see if it takes me somewhere else. But let's just see what it's doing. I'm not sure what the security group is to do. I don't know if it has created yet, but I think it's this one, right? So if I click on the security group, I can see there is like HTTP on port 80 from everywhere, right? And that's why you should appreciate some of the stages we've gone through before getting here, because now it means that you can basically go back into this stack for an example and see what is it creating. Like it's creating a security group. What is the security group supposed to do for you, right? You have all those things. We've seen launch template before now, right? So we know that usually you need like a launch template that gives you a blueprint for how more EC2 instances are brought right into place. Yes, there's like an elastic IP to keep more or less like a static IP, right? Because we know that your public IP address will change, right? But if you keep an elastic IP, it preserves your public IP for you, right? And yeah, we've seen auto scaling, right? So if you go here, auto scaling, for example, let's see. So it probably has created an auto scaling group. It wanted one, instances that are there, one, desired is one, min is one, max is one. Yeah, because we use like one of the cheapest tier just to say we want to keep things simple, right? But one thing the beauty of this is the fact that I think you're at that stage where you're beginning to appreciate these things, right? Because these are things we did ourselves. We actually created an auto scaling group at some point ourselves. We did specify min, max. We did that. We configured it with a load balancer. But Elastic Load Beanstalk can do all that for you, so that because yeah, a load balancer is a load balancer. Beanstalk can isolate, more or less like take away all that burden from you and just allow you focus on your application, right? So it's created, and if you see, the most important thing is that there's a desired capacity of one. And I'm sure if I go to EC2 instance, most likely there's like an instance that has been created for me, right? So if I go EC2, right, instance, I'm sure there's one EC2 instance that is running now that is receiving traffic. So if I go to instances, let's see, there will be one EC2 instance that is running. Cool. There is an EC2 instance running T3 micro, right? And then, so what happens? If I go back to Elastic Beanstalk, the environment has been created. You can see it's healthy, all right? The health is okay. Remember, also, when we're doing ALB and auto scaling group, EC2 instances, we're doing it ourselves. We had to more or less like set up the health checks, tell it exactly where to go and call and all that. But all that was set up for us. We didn't even have to do anything. And it says, Node.js is running and all that. So the next thing is that, if I take this domain and I try to open it in the browser, you can see I already have my application running, right? So this is something that we would have done, right? We would have created a load balancer, would have created an auto scaling group, would have created a security group. We would have done all these configurations and put them together. But the thing is that depending on your use case, you can actually go one step higher, right? There are people who still operate like they basically set up their things themselves, like set up the load balancing, the auto scaling themselves. But there is a tool called Elastic Beanstalk that can do all that for you. But it's nice that we actually went through the process of seeing exactly what it takes for you to have something that is running via the URL, right? You definitely know that this is going to a load balancer. A load balancer is calling a set of EC2 instances inside of a target group, all powered by an auto scaling group, right? And that you would see because in the CloudFormation, you can actually go there. You can actually examine everything that is being created. So it's not magic. Everything that is created here is basically most of the things that we're used to, right? The scaling group, the launch template, the security group, and then the auto scaling group itself that brings up the EC2 instance, right? But all this is managed for you. And that's really what you need to know at this level about Elastic Beanstalk. The good thing about it is that if the infrastructure has already been given to you, this could be your application, right? It could be your Python application, it could be your Node.js application. You just basically need to now point it to where it should be, right? More or less like with more configuration, this can actually now load your application. But you can see how it has taken away the pain of having to do it manually, set it up, one after the other, right? So let's go back to the environment that has been created for us. If you go into the environment itself, that's the domain. You basically will see things like, it tells you everything that has happened. You started creating the environment at this point, from pending to initialized. You can go into the health to see what exactly it's doing. And I'm sure there's like an instance here that is checking for, right? It's trying to check, it has passed the health check. That's how we're seeing it in the UI. Also, there's going to be logs, right? Probably if we configure the logs, and there will definitely be logs showing up here. You can also monitor, right? Remember, we said that scaling, as we saw for auto scaling, right? Sometimes when you want to scale, a lot of them use like metrics, right? But here it's easy for you to see what's like the CPU utilization, what's like the network traffic that is coming in, or the network traffic that is going out, right? You can create alarms, right? You can create alarms based on whatever is happening. Some of these things, as we grow, we'll begin to see them even in details. But one thing you should appreciate here is the fact that without creating a load balancer and auto scaling group, EC2 instance, without going through all the things we did on Sunday, you can have an instance that is running, right? Running your application, which is what you really need to know about elastic load balancing, right? But as time goes on, you know that elastic beanstalk, as time goes on, you will begin to see that it's not just what we just did, right? This could actually be part of a pipeline, for example. This could connect, you could actually manage the database also as part of this, as part of this connection. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to share. It's not with just the basic example, we can get an hello world page. Okay. So, but while I'm there, I basically just need to go back to the environment and tear it down. Okay. Because it's just for this test. And right now it's available here. So anyone can actually go there. So I don't need it again. I can basically and it's just as simple as tearing down the environment, right? Because if you tear down the environment, you didn't create many of those things manually. So the environment is smart enough to basically clean up things on your behalf, right? So I'm just going to say, enter the name of the environment. I think this is the name of the environment. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this. I'm just going to paste it, and then I'm just going to terminate the environment, right? If I refresh, pretty much will take some time to do its thing, but let's see. Let me see if that is in progress. But let me also see CloudFormation. CloudFormation is something you see. Yeah, you can see delete is in progress. So if you know CloudFormation very well, it's just like it's infrastructure as code basically. So there was an infrastructure there was like a template that was executed as part of creating an Elastic Beanstalk environment. And once that was done, that template is now being destroyed. So if you go and see the event, let me move this a bit back. Just move this out of the way. But one thing you see is that the last event we saw. Let me refresh this. One thing you notice is that there was really the last event we saw was the create, right? So the ALV, this was when it was fully created. But now you can see there is now like a delete in progress, right? So it goes back, it tries to delete everything, and it knows exactly the sequence of steps it's going to use to delete them, right? To keep deleting them till it deletes the entire environment, okay? And if I refresh the event, there'll be more events, depending on what is being deleted. If I go back to pretty much this site probably will not load again. It's stopped in the loading phase. This is already showing the health check has changed. It means something is being deleted at the back end. And if I go back to the auto scaling group, for example, the one we had before, what is happening? It probably is updating the capacity to 0, right? And if we go back to the instance, EC2 instance itself, let's see what would have happened. So it's shutting down the EC2 instance, right? And I think these are things we had to do manually. So we created we had to terminate the EC2 instance, terminate the auto scaling group. We got rid of the target group. We deleted the auto scaling group ourselves, right? But with Elastic Beanstalk, all that can be more or less like taken away from you. And then all you just need to bother about is really your Node.js, your Python, or whatever application that you're dealing with. Okay. So I'll just give it this. Yeah, it will take some time to basically clean up the environment because it's going to be. I think it will be dependent on how quick it does the stack. It deletes the stack. Okay, so let's just give it time to do its thing, and then we'll go to the next topic for the day. So continue slideshow. So you just saw we just did a little demo for Beanstalk, right? So the example we did was like a dev test environment, right? That creates just one instance, but you can do more. You can do highly available environments, right? With the use of auto scaling group and then the load balancer. Okay, and then as time goes on, we'll begin to see other deployment options that are there. How you can do blue-green deployment, how you can do all at once, rolling updates, and then immutable deployment. But at this step, you just need to know Elastic Beanstalk, the fact that it can more or less like do exactly what we're doing, where we're combining a lot of like the auto scaling, the load balancing, all that can now be managed for you as an infrastructure, like more or less like as a platform. And then all that is required from you is for you to bring in your application, right? In our own case, we did Node.js, but it can be any other thing. And that brings us to something else called Lightsail. I think they're also kind of similar, but we'll also see how this differs from Elastic Beanstalk. And the beauty of it is just the fact that there's just so many options in the AWS infrastructure, like the AWS cloud platform, where there's really no one way of getting things done. It just depends on what works for you, right? So what is Amazon Lightsail? It's basically a VPS, right? So a virtual private server, right? But as time goes on, you see how it differs from the other compute types that we've seen. But the good thing about it is that it really comes up with like more or less like a blueprint, a pre-configured blueprint, right? Whether it's like your Node.js application, your Lambda stack, or your WordPress application, NJS application, it basically comes up with a blueprint, right, that you can execute. It can include compute, storage, networking, DNS, load balancing, as we'll see. It's really easy to use, right? So Lightsail is really for beginners. If you've ever used the VPS before, I think Lightsail is going to appeal to you because it's just a VPS. It's a VPS. You just pay. It's just like I don't know how many of you have hosted applications before in the past, but usually if you want to host application, you just go to like a platform that can give you like a virtual private server, and then in that server you just push in your application. That's it. You're already live, right? Yeah. Simple use. The use case here is like simple web apps, right? Or simple websites, dev test environment that you don't really need. There's not a lot going on. So if I wanted to host my application right now, maybe I just have like a small application that I wanted to host, and S3 will not work for me. Lightsail is also could be an option, right? Because you don't really need to think about all the underlying things that is required for you to have it just running. You just basically need the application itself. Um, no auto scaling. That's one thing you should notice about Lightsail. And also there's really limited AWS integration. So like I said, it's really for standalone applications that you might want to execute in the AWS platform. So when you think about let me move this a bit down. So when you think about the different options that we've seen today, before I'm going to go back to Lightsail, like do a demo of Lightsail. But if you look at all the options that we've looked at since we started, Lambda is simple when you think about the complexity, right? But Lightsail is really very simple because Lambda, I think there's still a lot going on. And the fact that if you look at how Lambda is used, it's used in a lot of places where there's like event-driven architecture. So to some extent, you need someone that kind of understands the AWS ecosystem, right? But if you look at Lightsail, the use case itself, you don't need all that. You just have an application. Maybe it's like an engineered application that you just want to host in the cloud. You could just get a VPS to do that for you, right? EC2 is obviously the most complex because you're handling. It's like the more or less like the lowest level of things, right? It's infrastructure, like I mentioned in that diagram, it's infrastructure as a service at that point. You're taking up the infrastructure, so you're managing everything yourself, right? And then Beanstalk is medium because it does a lot of those things for you already, and then you're just bringing in your application. Pricing, Lambda we've seen is per request, right? So every time you make a request, that's when you pay. For Elastic Beanstalk is basically EC2. Whatever resource that you're using is what you're going to be paying for. You're not paying for the platform. But Lightsail, that's how Lightsail differs. Lightsail is really fixed monthly pricing. And then EC2 is also like a pay-as-you-go model, right? So when you think also about the infra control, Lightsail, limited control, obviously. EC2, because it's infrastructure as service, you're taking full ownership, right? Beanstalk, some things are already taken away from you, like we saw, right? But so it's more or less like medium. And then for Lambda, we know whenever anything is serverless, just know that the compute, you've given up the compute, right? So definitely you don't have any control over the compute that is running for Lambda. Target users for Lightsail, I think that's the question I asked for at the beginning. It's really for beginners, right? EC2 expert. The reason is because you need to know your way around the EC2 machine. Whether usually EC2 will come up, will need like an operating system, right? In most cases, a lot of people use Linux, so it means to some extent you still need to know your way around for you to be able to manage the infrastructure that comes with it, right? Beanstalk, if you're a developer, you don't really care about the infrastructure. You don't really care. You just want something AWS already has that works. Give me a load balancer, an auto scaling group. Let me just bring my application, right? So that's why Beanstalk is going to be a focus, especially when you are delving into like the developer certifications, right? Or going that route, you need to understand Beanstalk, right? Lambda is also for developers too, because sometimes you just want a compute that runs your code, right? And when you see, I did put some best use for, right? Event driven is obviously Lambda. You can't take it away from it. Web application, Beanstalk is going to shine there. And then Lightsail is also going to shine, but it just depends on how complex your application is, right? But EC2 is really when you want to take up the customization, depending on what you want. If you really want to take the application to like you want to use something more custom, you will need like you use EC2, okay? So while we're here, I think we'll just go back to Lightsail. So we're here. Let's see what has happened to the environment we're creating. So the stack delete is complete. Okay, and don't worry, you're going to see CloudFormation at some point. It's really nice. It's nice. There's a lot that happens in stack in CloudFormation. Okay, but there's no stack again. There was a stack here. It's deleted, and that tells me that the environment is also gone. Like if I refresh this, basically it's gone. Like I think maybe terminate it now. I'm not sure why it's still showing there, but let's see. Terminate. What is this saying now? Yeah, it's just saying it's unknown, but definitely it's deleted. It's deleted whatever. No, this is like to restore. So it's just in an unknown state. Whatever is running here is not going to work again because all the resources has been deleted for us. So if you go back to security group, this security group was created. It's gone. The auto scaling group that was created, if I refresh, it's no longer there. What about the EC2 instance that was done? It probably is terminated, right? These are all the things we did manually and it's been taken care of for us. So let's go to Lightsail and see what Lightsail looks like. So if I go to Lightsail and I click Lightsail, and here it's still my account, I'm not going anywhere. So I'm just going to open Lightsail. It tells me good evening, right? So like we said, it's a VPS, right? A virtual private server. So if I wanted to create just a simple Lightsail environment, so in this case, I'm just going to say Linux, right? There's still room for you to choose like your OS. So there's Windows and there's Linux, but here I can choose to use Windows. And here I can say I want the OS only, but because of this demo, I want an app and an OS, right? So I'm just going to do Nginx. I don't have like a launch script, but again, you've seen what the launch script is, right? So for people on this call, you should be able to host software for like host an application for someone because you know what a launch script is. You can actually paste code here that would also execute as part of bringing up the machine, right? We've seen that, if you wanted like an SSH key, that would always show up. But this is where it gets interesting. And that's just one of the difference you need to understand about Lightsail is the fact that here you get to choose the price. All right, you get to choose, and it's per month. Here it's telling me that for the first 90 days, it's free for me. So if I choose any of these three, it's free for the first 90 days. But one thing you should just notice is that it's per month, right? So I can pay $5 per month to have this. And then if you look closely, you see that this one will give me like 512 megabytes, right, of RAM, and 2 CPUs, 20 GB SSD storage, and then like 1 TB transfer, right? So if this meets my requirements, I'm fine with it. You can also check, you can basically check any of these instances depending on your current use case and where you want to be. So you can check any of that to decide what you want. But in this case, I'm just going to say, let me say my simple, yeah, it's really my simple web server. Okay, so I'm just going to do this. I don't really need any tag. I don't need anything. So I can just go here and I can just create the instance. So just going to create it. If you see my instance is creating, let's give it some time. And it says it's running. So let's go into the instance. Let's see. If you go to metrics, for example, what is there? I think over time it's going to tell you like your CPU, if it's using your CPU, like percentage of the CPU being used, snapshot if there is any. So you can take you see we've also seen snapshotting, right, when we're doing EBS, right? So we've seen how we could take snapshot, but the concept is the same because the server that we just launched is an EC2 machine. At the end of the day, you can take a snapshot of it, right? Storage, we said, if you notice at the beginning, it said it came with 20 GB, right? So it tells you the path of the storage. Networking, it tells you exactly basically what is going on. SSH, HTTP, HTTPS. Domains, obviously we don't have, right? But if we have like a domain that we wanted to point to the application, we should be able to do that. What about tags? We don't have any tags. History, there is no history right now. So yeah, you can also connect, right? And I'm sure we've seen this work with EC2 instance, right? But if I actually connect, it takes me into the box of the machine. I can do whatever I want to do, right? Here it looks like it's a Bitnami application, for those of you who are familiar with it. But I'm going to come back to this. So if I check, there is like a public IP here, right, that I have, but it says it's running. So if I go here and I do HTTP, and I do this, oopsie, what did I just do? Let me see. You can see, yeah, my application is running. I didn't have to do anything. Like I didn't have to do anything. It came with a custom application, right? But again, this is really an application, right? But it means that I can actually upload my own application to exactly this. This is Nginx. So if you understand Nginx very well, I can actually customize this. So for example, if I go back to here, we already have like an SSH session going on. I think I have a script that is handy that I can do. I can basically just customize what I have. Like let me see if I do this. So because I know that if I check, you guys can still see my screen, right? So if I do, where am I? I'm in Bitnami. If I try to get the content of, sorry, I don't know what. Let me see. Let me show you something. So I think my system is just kind of frozen. It's not responding as I want. But, okay. I actually wanted to paste something else. Let me see. Okay. So you can see. So the part that I just pasted is actually the part of this home page. This one. That's what it's showing. So you can see, proudly be built by Bitnami, right? So if I go back to where I was looking at, I think that is it. This one. So I have like a handy script here that I can just use to replace this home page. So if I wanted to paste this, I'll just do this, right? So it's done. If I refresh this page, one thing you notice is that if you were in the class when we're doing like EC2, we're customizing it. I just did that same code and customized the page, right? So it means, yeah, you can as well just get the VPS from AWS and just load your application into the VPS depending on what your environment is, whether it's what do you call it, whether it's Node.js application or Nginx application. You can basically just load it, and that's it. And that's why it's for beginners, right? You can basically just have that running for you. So if you go back to the environment, for example, Yeah, it's running. SSH is there for you. If you wanted to do some things, you can delete it, you can stop it, you can actually reboot it if you want. And all that is just basically how we dealt with EC2, right? Because these things are just layer on top of EC2. It just depends on how much you want to own. As time goes on, you see that you can actually create a database. Pretty much would also more or less like look at it. It will be similar. That's just the way Lightsail operates. The fact that it's usually per month, right? How you pay monthly, and then you can also go to things like networking, add static IP, add load balancing. But this is you not configuring anything, just going into the UI and just taking things as you want, right? So you can put a CDN on top of it if you wanted. That's pretty much Lightsail. So Lightsail is really for beginners. If you don't want to stress, you just want something that launches your application for you immediately. You can just have it and the application is served, right? So you can see it's running as expected. Yeah, so I'm just going to go back to my instance, and then what am I going to do? I just want to delete it. I don't need it anymore, all right, for this class. So it's as simple as that. So at this level, it means that you should be able to host your own website. At least I think you have like it's mentioned here. You can start with first 90 days is free if you use any of these ones, right? So it means that even with your free tier account, you can already have like a website running for you. Cool. So let's see. If I refresh this, it's not going to work again because the instance has been terminated. Okay. Let's go back to our slide. So and that goes, you can see how easy it was, right? Very, very easy. The other one we saw, if you look at Beanstalk, we saw that it was actually creating a CloudFormation stack. It means that if you are a developer and you are using Beanstalk, to some extent, you still have an idea of those things that it's creating, and you pretty much have influence over it, right? But for Lightsail, it's just UI based. You're just dealing with the VPS from the UI. Okay. So when to use which compute is the next question. So if you think about the different computes that we've looked at, when do you use which? EC2 when you want full control, all right, steady workloads, custom software. We've seen, and we've done all that through the use of AMI, right? You've seen when at the times where we use AMI, we've seen how we could actually start with the base AMI, customize it, and then use a different AMI, right? Lambda, basically event-driven architecture, right? So if you, I think I've said that a lot of times now, and then ECS, Fargate is really containerized, right? You just have to take note of it that ECS, anything around ECS and Fargate, your application has to be containerized applications, right? So containerized apps, microservices, you can always use ECS and Fargate. Batch is also containerized. The only difference is that batch is really, there's no concept of like having a service, right? So ECS will build more or less like microservice architecture, but batch is not meant to be service. It's meant to be workloads that are running. Either they require a lot of compute or they will need to run for a long time, right? So which is high performance computing or batch jobs. So it's basically jobs. They are not microservices that respond to application, right? And then we've seen Beanstalk. Beanstalk is really good. If you are like someone who is a developer, you don't really care, you care less about the infrastructure. You just want, give me a load balancer, give me an auto scaling group. I don't really need to configure all that myself. I just bring in your application. So it's developer, it's more or less like very developer friendly. And then Lightsail is really for simple website. We saw it, how easy it was just to create a VPS, specify the capacity we need, which we are going to pay for a month, and then just load in our applications, more or less like our application there. Boom, it was already live. Okay, so remember, this class is still about modern compute. There's some things that you need to know as you understand what modern compute is, because it depends on your journey. It depends on where you, if you think about it, depends on, like if you start your career, you probably will be working with someone, right? It depends on where they are in their journey. And I just wanted to talk about some of these things because you see them because of the different tools that I've showed you that handles compute. You need to now understand some of these things and what they mean, right? So if you ever think about rehost, all right, you hear it also as part of like understanding your how you deal with the cloud. Rehost is basically you are rehosting, right? So you had like an AMI or like an operating system on your old environment, but now you're moving to the cloud and you just want to rehost that same operating system, right? Or whatever was baked into the operating system. That's like a rehosting, right? There is no way some of the compute that I've shared to you would work for you, right? That's where EC2 comes in, because you basically take a snapshot of that AMI and just use it to boot up your EC2 instance, right? Minimal change. You don't need to do much, right? And rehost is usually another form for lift and shift, meaning you're lifting from wherever you're starting from and shifting it to the cloud. It's a way, and there are many reasons you want to do that, because you don't have time. There's no time. You just want to move fast, right? So you're looking at which options will just allow you move, do that transition very fast. So that's why sometimes it's just easy to lift it, right? Lift it and shift it to the cloud, and it's usually rehost. You are just rehosting. Nothing is basically changing. It's still the same. You are keeping almost everything the same, right? But there is also room for you to re-platform, right? So it's more or less like you can say, okay, because I'm moving to the cloud, I'll keep my services the same, I'll keep my application the same, but I need infrastructure from the cloud. So Beanstalk will be a way for you, but you can see the mention of platform, right? Because Beanstalk is a platform as a service. So whenever you ever think of like, okay, what if I want to re-platform? And then you can use something like Beanstalk to basically get infrastructure from the cloud, but your application stays the same, right? Or you can also use Lightsail for more or less like very simple apps and do use that to do your re-platform needs. But there's also your refactoring, right? Because if in the cloud, on-premise or wherever you're coming from, your application was not containerized, right? For it to now move to any of the services that I just mentioned, EKS, ECS, which are all container based, you have to do some refactoring, right? So you basically have to take your microservices and then containerize them for them to run on ECS or run on EKS, right? But again, you can also go a different route. And these things, depending on which route you choose, can increase the complexity. Okay, one is basically to re-architect the solution entirely, right? So because if all you were doing before there was no event pattern in whatever you were doing, you could say, I think running this thing 24 hours doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe I could start using more of the new pattern, right? Like serverless, but that would require some architecting because usually, like you are aware, a lot of the serverless Lambda, they're all event driven, right? It means you need to start thinking about showing your messages either to like an SNS topic or to like, a queue, and something else is responding to it in the form of a Lambda function and then processing that event, right? So there's some sort of re-architecting that is happening in that kind of model. But again, there is also room for hybrid, right? Hybrid is the fact that you can mix and match many of these things. You can rehost in some places, replatform in some places, and then refactor if they need be. So it's not like one size fits all, right? Sometimes you also think about how long will it take for us to re-architect this. If it's going to take too long, maybe let's keep this as something that we just lift and shift. But for this one, maybe it's easy. We could just use like a drop-in replacement service in the cloud that is already doing what we're trying to achieve, right? So these are some of the things you need to take note of, right? As time goes on in your journey. Okay. So when you think about the cost comparison across the services, EC2, predictable pricing, right? The only issue is that when you launch an EC2 instance, whether you're using it or not, you're paying, right? So it's not about, so if you are using it or you're not using it, in as much as it's running, you're going to be paying for it, right? But if you think about Lambda is really good. The fact that Lambda is sleeping whenever it's not doing anything, and only when it has to do anything, that's when you are invoking it, right? And only during that time is what you're going to be paying for. So it's really pay per use, right? So it's really the most cost effective if you have like a sporadic workload, something that should scale for you, and just pay for that burst. And then when you're not doing anything, you're also not incurring cost. Fargate, yeah, there's some cost that comes with it, but again, a lot of people just like the fact that they don't have any EC2 machines to manage, right? So because the infrastructure is given to you, you are just bringing your application on top of it, right? And then if you think about batch, you can obviously leverage spot instances to make your compute even far more cheaper, right? Lightsail we've seen it's fixed price, okay? It's fixed. Monthly, there's something you're committing to paying, right? But it comes with the bundle for you. And then cost of optimization, it just depends on whatever you're doing. If it's a container, you're right sizing. If it's if there is need for you to use spot instances, that can be interrupted, right? And we've also seen the need for you to use like savings plans if there's need, if your workload supports that. Okay. So when you think about shared responsibility model for the things that I've mentioned, containers and serverless, right? Lambda, if in as much as the code you are running, remember you're only executing code, right? AWS will do their part to make sure whatever infrastructure Lambda is running on is secure, but the code you're executing has to be secure, right? And it must obviously not expose credentials that are meant to be kept secret and all that, right? And similarly for container orchestration, EKS control, ECS, EKS, all those control planes, AWS will do perfect, like manage them for you properly, right? But the images that you're using, the container images, you have to make sure that they're using the right OS, it's secure, it's doing what it's meant to be doing, right? Fargate, all the infrastructure is obviously managed for you, right? But again, the application you're running is similar. You still have to make sure it's secure. Beanstalk, the platform will be updated for you. Remember, it's platform as a service, right? But the application code you are executing, you have to, take care of the security of the application. And then Lightsail, obviously the OS and the OS patch, maintenance of that instance, the box that you got, AWS will do that for you. For the application that you're also bringing in, you are going to be maintaining it yourself. So that's it. So that's everything about the modern compute in AWS. Remember, we spent like a ton of time talking about EC2, and then we used this segment to basically look at the other computes that are out there. So just a summary: containers are really what changed everything, and in AWS there's really EKS for you to do like your containerized, for you to run your containerized application, right? We also saw that Lambda is really good for your event-driven pattern, especially around AWS services. Whether you want to integrate it with API gateway, we saw what API gateway was, step functions, or your more or less like your event bridge, right? So events that are happening within your account, if you wanted to respond to them, Lambda is really like a very good with a good use case for those kind of things. Batch computing, we've seen. Lambda is for short tests. Batch computing is going to help you for long running jobs, right? Quick deployment, we've seen how Beanstalk can abstract many of the complexity we've seen doing these things ourselves manually. But I'm happy we went through the process of trying to do it ourselves so that we actually know what it takes for us to host like a highly available application, right? But all that can be abstracted by Beanstalk and done on our behalf. And then we also saw simple hosting. If you just needed a VPS that you pay for a month for, right, gives you some compute already, and then you can just host your application in the form of Lightsail, right? We said modernization, depending on which route you take, it has its own characteristics, depending on which route you choose to go, right? And then customization, cost optimization. You obviously sports. You always see sport. Okay, sport is really good. The fact that if your workload is not always running, it means that you can always run them on like instances that are pretty much that are there for you to run them, and you can pay less, right? So free machines basically, but it can be taken away from you with a short notice. So if your workload is built around managing that, spot instances will save you a lot of money, right? There's spots almost in a lot of places, and you see. So what you just need to do is to understand that spot instances are free instances that you can use. They're not free, but they're just more or less like someone else is not using it and you're using it, and for that reason you're paying way cheap money, but it can be taken back from you, right? And then you can also adopt Lambda if you ever wanted to go the route of pay per use. Basically, I only want to pay if I'm doing something, and if I'm not doing anything, I don't want to incur any cost. Okay, so that brings us to the end of modern compute. I hope that you appreciate how I'm trying to, as much as possible, help you understand the compute options that are there, and how I know with time we're going to be breaking some of these things down. We're going to be going deeper. We're going to be understanding them as individually. But it's good for you to have like, because that's the idea. Before you go into the cloud, it's good for you to see the things around compute, the things around storage, the things you'll be seeing, right? And it begins to help you appreciate the cloud. And as you've seen, you can see how flexible it is. You can choose to go the very hard route and just take your EC2 instance and handle it yourself. But you can also get very some other options that just makes your life easy. Like I tell people, for me, for example, like most of the things I do, there is all EKS on top of EC2, ECS on top of it. So sometimes I don't even get to do a lot with EC2 machines directly. But those options are always there. If you're that person who wants, like you want direct interaction with the EC2 instance, it's also there. The infra can be given to you, and you can do anything you want to do with it. Okay.